Well, good morning, everyone. Hello and welcome. This is episode 3 of The Blend, which is presented by HAR's Political Affairs and TREPAC departments. And during this world where we're now doing everything virtually, we wanted a way to still keep our members informed of what's going on with in the political climate, with our recommended candidates. So if you missed our first 2 episodes, we've had other representatives on, Anna Eastman, Harold Dutton, Sarah Davis. You can watch all of those over at youtube.com/HARTV. And today we're really excited to have 2 political experts with us. I was just listening to Dr. Stein talk before we got started here. I mean, just a wealth of information. I think we could easily go past an hour today if we wanted to, but we won't. So I'd like to welcome our first guest, who is Dr. Stein. He is a Lena Goldman Fox Professor of Political Science at Rice University. Professor Stein is an expert on urban politics and public policy. He is the author of several books. Your current research, it looks like, has been supported by the National Science Foundation and examines the impact of federal aid on electoral trajectories of office holders. We are really, really excited to hear what you have to say today. And I know you have a lot of stuff to talk about. So let's just jump right in. And you tell us, Dr. Stein, what are the major political trends that you are seeing right now, and how are they going to affect the election in November?
Well, let me put my slides up, and then I'll...
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I think I screwed up here. Give me 1 second. Share my screen. Here we go.
Here we go.
Okay. Everybody, I hope, can see this. What I'm going to do, and I hope I don't go too fast, but I wanted to kind of give you a historical picture of where the electorate looks like. This is a picture of probably about 200 roughly million registered voters starting in 2006 and going to, of course, 2018, the last time midterm. And there are a couple of things that are noteworthy here. For instance, if you look at the non-college white voter, which has often been cited as a base for the president's 2016 victory, and hopefully, if you're a supporter of the president, a continued loyal base, it's been going down. The proportion of people who were registered in 2006 who were white, non-college, 56. Big. That number's dropped almost 10 points, down to 9 to 47. College-educated white voters gone up a little bit, but pretty stable. The group that's seen the biggest increase, although they are still a distinctive minority, are African Americans, Latinx, and Asians. African Americans in the electorate, and these are people not just registered, but who vote, have gone from 9 to 12. Latinx have gone to 5 to 8, almost doubled. And Asian American and others have gone from 4 from 5. So this is clearly where the Democrats think they have their base support. And you can begin to see that this 2020 election is going to hinge on not only the loyalty of this white non-college educated, but whether or not their numbers, which have begun to shrink, can come back in numeric. If we look at the next slide, what we see is what happened in 2012 to 2016. Red areas mean the shift. That is, what I've done here is look at the share of vote the Democrat got in that county, and each of these little dots are counties, about 3,300 of them, and what share of the vote the Democrat got. And you can begin to see that that difference favored Republicans. The darker the red, the more it favored. So the world in 2016 had shifted from Barack Obama's re-election to something considerably different with the election of President Trump. And note, the deeper red is in the upper Midwest sections of Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Illinois, of course, Minnesota and Iowa. This is where I think the president, as we've thought before, won his election in 16. But look what happened in 18. In a midterm election, the world just flipped. In areas where the president had done previously very well, the upper Midwest, which were solidly red, in the midterm, when the president wasn't on the ballot, and only senators and congressmen and some governors, you can begin to see how well the Democrats did and came back. And look at West Virginia, which has been a really strong base of support, not just for the president, but for the Republican Party. you saw as many as 3 congressional seats flip. Of course, in Minnesota, you began to see what we call the liberal or progressive wing of the Democratic Party coming from upper Midwest Minnesota. This is a little bit of a tricky table, but basically it tells you where did the Democrats pick up their biggest margin of change. And you can begin to see that their biggest margin of change was in the urban areas, but it continued in 2018 in these suburban areas. So what you hear in the news, whether it's Fox, CNN, or the Klingons, the Democrats in 18 were winning back areas of the Midwest, suburban areas. They were not even doing that badly, but they drop off in the rural areas. What happened to the Republicans in the 2012 to 2016 area is that they really clobbered the Democrats in suburban and Republican areas and rural areas. So again, the picture is beginning to get pretty clear here about what the election is going to look like. And so let's take a peek at where the president is as of yesterday. Starting in March, when the coronavirus probably hit its peak and had what I would say is extreme damage on the president, he was trailing Biden, the presumed nominee at this point, by 5 points, and that has widened to 8. And I emphasize that the date, August 5th. I'll get back to that in a moment, but that's really important. Everyone will tell you we have what? 90 days to election day. What I'm going to tell you is it's nowhere near that much. So August 5th, the president's trailing Mr. Biden by 8 points. Well, in 2016, the polls were wrong. They weren't wrong. They just didn't focus on where it mattered. And that, of course, as we all know, are battleground states. So let's look at the battleground states that delivered the president his victory in 2016. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Florida, Arizona, North Carolina. Some might throw in some other states, but in each of these 6 states, the president eked out a victory of between 1 and 4 points. Arizona and North Carolina, 4, but the key ones, I think, are Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. There, the victory was by less than 20,000 votes in each of those states. So those are close victories, but they were victories. And when you win by 1, you get all the electoral votes. As of June, and I'll tell you why I picked June in a moment, the president's trailing Mr. Biden between 6 and as much as 11 points. Particularly look at the top 3, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. His margin there is really quite large. In the states of Florida, Arizona, and North Carolina, the margins are still well outside the error rate, and particularly large in North Carolina, a state I would have thought the president would be doing better in. What does this basically mean for the upcoming election? I don't think the president's in good shape, but let's shift to the Senate, where, of course, the Republicans hold a 6-seat advantage, 3 to win if, of course, the president is not reelected. Mr. Biden would be elected. His vice president would sit in the President Pro Tem seat of the Senate and be the tie-breaking vote if there was a tie. Here, I think the real issue is Democrats have a long stretch. I've picked 5 states that I think they could probably pick up 3 seats from. Clearly, North Carolina, they're doing well in. Arizona and Maine. I think the Montana seat, Daines is the incumbent. Bullock is the governor, a popular Democratic governor. That race is probably closer than the 6 points here, but it seems like it's a stretch. But one of the reasons I put Mr. Cornyn in here is that John Cornyn, of course, is the senior senator up for re-election. And he's the number 2 person in the Senate. You would think in Texas he would be doing well. And against Ms. Hager, a former Air Force officer, he has a 6-point lead. Yesterday, a poll came out from Monmouth College that showed that Cornyn actually was trailing, although he was leading Hager, he was running behind President Trump. And that's hard to believe, but not necessarily. My argument would be that Cornyn is more of a centrist Republican, and that in Texas, the support for the president comes from a base that's more conservative than even John Cornyn, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Cornyn actually run behind the president. I'm hard pressed to believe that Cornyn will not win his reelection, but I will not rule out the possibility, particularly with the virus and things getting worse and a higher turnout, particularly vote by mail in this state, that both the president and Cornyn will be held, if they do win, to something less than 5 points and closer to 3. When you get down that low, anything can happen. So I don't rule out the possibility. It's not a question of whether or when. The state has turned blue. The real question is, at what point do those voters show up? Moving on, let's talk about how we vote in America, because this becomes really important to my earlier point about, can the president win this election? Is there enough time? You know, we're in the fourth quarter, to use the terrible metaphor of football, which we might not be watching anymore, at least in this fall. But is the clock going to run out? And to understand that, you have to figure out how people vote. I suspect that many of us remember Election Day voting. Well, look at 2014 on the graph and go to 2018, and we've seen, I'm sorry, I apologize.
All right.
Okay. Most Americans in this election, I will predict, will not vote on Election Day. Between the coronavirus and the trends in mail-in voting and in-person voting, as we have in Texas, the Election Day myth of us all voting on one day at one place, not true anymore. In fact, I believe that the share of vote by mail will go from 25, probably come close to 40%. In-person early voting, which we of course have in Texas, will probably go up again, if not to 25 to 30%. That leaves Election Day for less than a majority of the vote. And if you want to consider, in 36 states, in-person voting will begin between 10 and 46 days before Election Day. In 7 states, voters will receive a mail ballot 21 days before November 3rd. Only 7 states allow only in-person voting on Election Day. So 43 other states allow you to vote well before Election Day. What does that mean? It means that the president probably has, at best, 60 days of real campaigns. Most people will have received, cast, and returned their ballot, either in person or by mail, before we have the second debate. I would imagine a quarter before the first debate, and that's assuming there are any debates at all.
Yeah.
Some reason to believe that Mr. Biden might not debate the president. From the Democrats' point of view, that may not be a bad strategy.
And how does that affect last-minute campaigning when you've already got?
It means that the last minute doesn't matter. It means that people who, there is some evidence that a lot of people who do vote on Election Day or hand in their mail ballots on Election Day do so for fear that they're going to miss something. A story. We know some of the stories that affected the president in the 2016 election, the comment he made on the bus. But I think what you've got here is an electorate that is what we call baked. They know how they're going to vote. There aren't many undecideds. If you don't believe in any poll, then believe this, that when every poll is published, when people are asked who they're going to vote for, the share of that vote undecided is well below single digits. Usually it's 10 to 12, sometimes as much as 16, depending on the race, whether it's president. I think Americans here are as polarized as they've ever been. And here's a distribution of registered voters in Texas by their partisan affiliation. If you will want to know, we don't have party registration, but that's not hard to figure out in Texas, mostly because we know where people live and they live with other people like themselves, Democrats, Republicans, or independents. And traditionally in 2020, it's what we would expect, a 6% advantage for the Democrats over the Republicans, where the independents, actually, if you look at that slope at the bottom of the graph, they're slightly more skewed towards being Republicans and Democrats. But here's another picture. What I did here was look at the 150 Texas State House races. And I asked a simple question. What incumbents were elected in 2018 with a margin of less than 5%? That means like a 55, 54, 46 and less. A little less than that, 53. And what I'm seeing here is that the margin of difference between Republican and Democrat now has shrunk to 3 points. And if you want to press us a little further, and I'm actually running much quicker here, so I'll be happy to take questions. Look at new registrations since 2017. Since the president's been elected, what you see in the upper, oh, I'm sorry. I'm doing this again. I apologize. I'm getting too quick. You had at 2017, the Republicans had a 1 million vote advantage among registrants. That's a big advantage. And it ends up being about the 5%, 6%, actually a little more, just in registrants. But when you look at new registrants, what you're beginning to see is that the Democrats are out registering Republicans. Now, I want to be clear here. These are new registrants. Okay. 1.2 million to 1. Maybe 1. The question is, as a share of Democratic vote, the Democrats up there is by 19%, the Republicans by 15%. This is a trend. I did this as of the election of President Trump. New registration figures that have just come out from the Secretary of State seem to suggest this rate of registration has accelerated for the Democrats, so that it's getting even wider. Mm-hmm. This is my point. When you go back to that earlier graph, if older, white, non-college educated voters are declining in number, what you're beginning to see is that the people who come in behind them, think of the electorate as a series of bins, and voters that are older eventually leave the electorate. They die, they retire, they move. And what comes in behind them is distinctively different. Besides being younger, they're non-white. They're African American, Latinx, they're Asian. And these are voters who are overwhelmingly predisposed to vote Democratic. Now in 2006, in Texas, many of those voters, particularly Latinx voters, had begun to move towards a Republican column. George W. Bush for governor won 38 to 39%. Even Greg Abbott was reaching, I say even, as late as Abbott's reelection, he was winning well over 35% of Hispanic votes. You could say he was running against a weak candidate, but he was doing that in an environment in which President Trump was pushing many, many Hispanic, Latinx voters away on immigration issues. I'm not going to make big projections here, but I think particularly in Texas, the situation is ripe for the Democrats probably to pick up a half a dozen state house seats. That won't give them a control of the House, but given where the Republican Party is in the state House, lost their leadership in the form of Mr. Biden, and are, I think, as split, maybe more so than Democrats, between people who are more conservative than, let's say, a John Cornyn and are favorites and fans of the president. It's not going to be obvious that the Democrats won't have some influence when they caucus in January of 2021, that they won't have some influence, if not on the speakership, on the choice of committees. So I think the Democrats have come back. The question is, how far have they come back, and can they, by 2022, take over? I don't believe the president will win the state of Texas by a margin of more than 5 points. And if you want, consider that in 2008, 12, and 16, the margin of victory for the presidential candidate of the Republican Party has dropped by 30% in each election, from 15 to 12 to 9, and I believe it'll be well below that in 2020. And I don't rule out the chances of the president losing Texas and Cornyn losing and House seats being lost, largely because of the consequences of the virus and the failure of voters to have confidence that any administration, and I think the next couple of days will tell you a lot about a relief bill that the Senate is unable to, and Mr. McConnell unable to move. I'd be happy to stop there. I'm going to hand back my screen to, and let Brandon, I guess, is moderating.
Well, let me ask you a few things first. So everything you're saying and a lot of polls have shown Democrats with the lead. So let's say they sweep the presidency, the House, the Senate. What would that look like for the next 4 years as far as policy goes?
Well, should the Democrats sweep, and this is a national sweep, I think one of the consequences is going to be that we're in a 2020 election, and we all know that's a decennial year, and a decennial year is when we're supposed to take the census, and we will take the census. How well we do remains to be seen. The virus hasn't contributed to an effective count, but that's when we redraw boundaries. And so what gave the Republicans their hegemony, their power from 2010? It was the ability to take those 50 state legislatures and control the redistricting plans for congressional seats, for state house seats, for state senate seats, all the way down. So if we get the kind of sweep that you're suggesting, and I'm not certain that that's going to happen, but assume for the moment the Democrats win a heavy number of state houses, then they'll be able to control that redistricting. And particularly on the House side, U.S. House of Representatives, I don't think the Republicans will be able to come back in the next decade. I don't think in this election, we didn't discuss this, but nobody's discussing the Republicans taking the majority back in the House. The only real issue is, can the Democrats get the Senate?
And a great reminder for everybody to go fill out your census.
Yes.
Don't lose those congressional seats.
We should be getting at least 2 and probably 3 new House seats. I can assure you that's not something the Republicans are happy about. I think what they would like to see is no new House seats. And why? They will probably turn all Democratic. Just not enough people of the Republican bent to support candidates in 39 congressional seats.
Okay, so I see a question. Any U.S. Senate seats that are currently Dem that could flip to Republican?
Oh, sure. The Republican in Alabama, I am relatively certain that Doug Jones will not hold on to that seat, and that the former Auburn, I was going to say Alabama, I hope I'm not offending anybody, Auburn football coach whose name escapes me and will probably escape most.
Tuberville.
Coverdale.
Yes.
I'm hard pressed to think that Doug Jones can hold on to that seat. The big hope would be that the Senate, I mean, this is what the president's saying, you have to hope for a disaster, God forbid, in Alabama, both between the virus, the recovery, and my sense is that Doug Jones was I wouldn't call it a fluke, but a situation arose in the Senate race in 2018 that was just, abominable for Republicans. And even then, Doug Jones, but I would say there's a slim to none chance. That's probably the biggest pickup. I can't imagine there are any others, mostly because the Republicans in 220 have more Senate seats up for re-election. And again, we've mentioned the ones, McSally, Tullis, I think Susan Collins is in a very tough situation. And I think, Senator Daines in Montana, those are the ones that I would be looking to see flip. But again, and the questioner is absolutely right. The Democrats really need to win 4 to 5, right? Because they're going to lose Alabama, so they're down 1. So they're going to have to pick up 4 to get 3. And of course, the 5th would, of course, assure them that the Senate would be in their hands, whether the president was reelected or not.
Any key races that we should really be keeping our eyes on?
Well, I mean, I think the races in the Senate, I would look. I think a state like Maine's kind of interesting. I'll tell you another one. Joni Ernest in Iowa. Joni Ernest is a freshman senator, elected, of course, 6 years ago, and she's really battling the current Secretary of State. And I would not think Iowa, you didn't see me listed as a state that I think is going to flip. The president's worked very hard to help farmers, pig farmers, the whole grain industry, and it's not worked well for him. The China effort just, I mean, you can say what you want, but it hasn't worked. And at the end of the day, you know, I'm sure the president has 101 excuses, but voters not interested in excuses. And Joni Ernst could have a very tough time getting reelected in that state. I think North Carolina is another one, because I think if Tullis loses that race, that's a state that will probably move from the R column to the D column in terms of as a reliable one. I think the Georgia one's even more messy. As you imagine, one seat is up, but there's another race on the ballot because the incumbent senator has retired, and Georgia has just a bizarre way of filling these unexpired terms. And so the incumbent who was appointed by the governor is running against whose name escapes me now, but is an owner of a WNBA team, is accused of being too just liberal. And Congressman Collins, who was on the House Impeachment Committee and has been a stalwart supporter of the president, looks like they're going to go into a runoff, but we won't have that runoff until after the November election in January. So it's possible the Senate seat is, well, I think the Republicans will hold one of those seats, but the Purdue race against Osmond is still a race that I would say is probably in the Republican column. But again, I think Georgia's really, like Texas, one of those states that's teetering on the edge of becoming solidly a blue state.
Well, I'd love to ask you, just before we let you go, you've been doing this a long time. Election years are always kind of crazy years, but I don't think we've ever seen a year like 2020. I mean, how much do you think just the events of this year have played into all of this?
Well, I mean, in 2016, we were, all bicycling along or walking along and saying, this guy Trump's not getting elected. We're going to see Hillary Clinton. And I don't think there was a person, including myself, who wasn't shocked, surprised, at least, but more like shocked. Now, was there anything unusual about 2016? No.
Not that I can't recall anything.
I don't.
On that year.
The economy was roaring along. Donald Trump stole the nomination, some say. I think Ted Cruz would surely think that. I think Ted Cruz thought he was going to be, if not the youngest, well, I guess he wouldn't have been younger than John Kennedy. But so I guess what I'm saying is that extraordinary events provide opportunities for governors, for any elected official, to show their mettle. And I think the thing that will be extraordinary about this election may simply be that the American public came to see a president who was not likely to have been elected in anybody's mind in 2016, not meet the challenge. And I think in an honest moment, everyone sitting in the House, in the Senate, in the state legislatures would look and say, if I had that chance, this is what I would have done. Easier said than done, but there's not much doubt in my mind that the American voters have made a judgment about the president, and he failed to put us in a position to fight the coronavirus. The economy, China, the Russians, the environment, nothing will, I think, ultimately change what you're seeing right now. And the real question is, will his supporters look the other way and simply say, he was dealt a bad hand. It was a China flu, I think is what he calls it, China virus. Or was it simply that the Democrats are rooting for the virus? I will expect that the president will try to move the debate to some other issue, demonstrations in Portland, rioting, attack on middle-class suburban communities. He's been doing that for about 3 weeks, and as I've said, the bar hasn't moved. The issue on the voters' minds right now is the coronavirus. A vaccine, a therapy, I think will do tremendously to enhance the president's reelection chances. However, my concern is, I think I told some of you before, is right now, I fear that most people, maybe even a majority, will not take the vaccine. Democrats, liberals will say that the president rushed the vaccine. It's not safe. It's not been vetted. Conservatives have always been suspicious of anybody telling them they have to have a vaccine. And between those two, we'll find that the virus just continues. And again, the fault does not lie in China or in the stars. I think what people are going to come to realize, it really resides with themselves. An inability to follow a leader, if there was one, And now I think with the president, I am not hopeful for his opportunities of winning this election. It will require something extraordinary, but it happened in 2016, so I'm not ruling it out.
Anything can happen, I feel like, this year. Well, we appreciate you being here. And would you be sharing those slides with us in case anybody asks us for them?
Oh, sure. They're all, yeah, anything.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much. And we're going to move on today to our second guest. We just talked about a lot of kind of national politics. Really excited to have on now Brandon Alderete. He is the Director of Political Affairs for Texas Realtors. And I didn't realize I was reading your bio. You've been there 20 years. That's a while. Okay, so you're going to have to unmute. There you go.
Yeah, no, it is a while. I had that email from Travis, my boss, in April. You've been here 20 years.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but.
Well, I mean, and what that means is you've seen some things. You've been around, you know realtors, you know real estate, you know Texas realtors probably better than most anybody. So we just talked a lot about the national election. Let's talk about Texas. What are you seeing right now going on leading up to election day here in Texas?
Well, you know, first of all, Dr. Stein was awesome. It's always good for me to get a national perspective because I'm so focused on the Texas legislature and Texas elections, local elections here. You know, having the insight on Maine and, you know, North Carolina and things like that it's really cool to have that perspective. I was watching some primaries on Tuesday, just, you know, political voyeurism at its best, just watching the Senate race in Washington for a rain.
Right.
So I really appreciate that and putting it all into context, the national context is really cool. You know, trends here in Texas, I mean, we saw it in 2018, right? You're seeing a bluing of the state, particularly. I mean, urban areas have kind of always been blue and they're getting bluer. Suburban areas are getting purple and even turning blue. We saw, you know, where I live, my district flipped. Really anything that touches Travis County in Central Texas flipped. So there's nothing, Williamson County, where, you know, just like 6 years ago, Republicans didn't even worry about running campaigns because they were up by, you know, 15 points. That deal flipped. And, you know, I see a lot of Democrat signs around here now.
Mm-hmm.
So you're seeing a bluing of the state, but what you're also seeing is in rural areas, it's getting redder.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one lesson I took from the 2018 election. You cannot forget how red rural Texas is.
Yeah.
It is bright candy apple red. So that, yeah, I think that's, you know, you're getting younger, less white, more Democrat.
Mm-hmm. So how do you think the way that Texas has handled this COVID crisis, how is that going to play out? Who is that helping? Who is that hurting?
Well, the way that I think one of the things about this election that makes it so interesting, right, is, you know, the people on this call are sophisticated. They understand the 3 levels of government and who's responsible for what. What I'm really interested in is how is there misplaced anger, right? Someone's mad at the governor, but they take it out on maybe the Republican in their House seat or their congressional representative or the president, or they're mad at the president and they may take it out at a local level. And does it, you know, how does all that work? You know, who knows? But how the way we handle this going to affect the election? I mean, it already has, right? The governor allowed local jurisdictions to postpone their elections to November. Mm-hmm. So now you're going to have ballots that are super long. The mayor of Smallville is going to be on the bottom end of a presidential ballot.
No straight ticket.
No straight ticket. I mean, look, there was already uncertainty around this, but when you add in, you know, COVID-19 and the response from the government, I mean, will there be an anti-incumbent sentiment? I think a lot of that depends on where we are with the pandemic, right? Will it be pro-incumbent? Do we have some massive breakthrough and everybody just gets better all of a sudden? Will there be a second wave of coronavirus? How do you maintain physical distancing during this high turnout election, particularly if there are fewer voting places, which we've seen, right? They've shuttered a lot of the smaller places because they cannot maintain physical distancing, or they don't have poll workers because most of those poll workers are high-risk populations, and they've said they're not going to work. So the election officers have had to say, well, we got to reduce the number of polling places, go to a bigger place. you're not going to be able to vote maybe at your local church like you used to. That place can't handle it. So now, how many people drive to the church? They can't vote there, and they're like, you know what? I tried.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
How do you think turnout's going to be?
I think we'll see pretty high turnout. Jennifer, I wish I knew. I don't know. I think we'll see high turnout. It's a presidential election. I think you've got a controversial ticket, president at the top of the ticket. A lot of people, are motivated to vote just by that, whether they love him or hate him. I think hardly anybody is kind of neutral on President Trump. So, look, you mentioned the end of straight ticket voting. I think there's a lot of things at play here, and any of them by themselves would be enough to inject uncertainty into this election. But man, when you take them all together, I don't know. And that's probably not what your group wants to hear, but you mentioned straight ticket voting, so let's talk about that. Statewide in Texas in 2018, like 67 or 68% of all ballots cast were straight ticket.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you take that away, I'm not concerned about, people voting for or against or in the presidential race, right? Everybody's got an opinion on that one. Probably the Senate too. But then what's the drop-off look like? And what does that look like for some of these swing House seats? The Texas House, which is going to be, is really, Dr. Stein mentioned he thinks about 6 seats. I think that's certainly plausible, likely even. But I mean, there are a lot of seats, and if I can, let me share my screen here. I pulled something up. Can y'all see that spreadsheet?
Yes.
Okay. So if you look, I've highlighted a couple of things here for you. These are seats where they're either lean one way or the other or a toss-up. With the fluorescent yellow highlights, that's where a Republican is currently occupying a seat that is classified as lean Democratic. So that's 1 Senate seat and 4 House seats. And then you've got 3 toss-ups where Republicans are incumbents, but that are, look, in HD 108 last time, which is Morgan Meyer up in Dallas, that was less than 100 votes. I saw a poll yesterday that had him down 8 points.
Wow.
So, I think 6 is reasonable to assume. And to be clear, to set the stage for everybody, the Democrats would need 9 seats. They currently hold 67. So they would need 9 to get to 76 and take control of the House. So I think 9 is certainly attainable. That also, though, I think it's worth mentioning, that just assumes that Democrats maintain all the seats that they picked up in 20.
Right.
The Republicans are just going to let them have it. And they're not. The Republicans are swinging, which they should. I don't know. We're in for a heck of a ride here, Jennifer.
I agree. It's going to be a very, very interesting fall. So you've worked on a lot of campaigns, and I just want to ask personally, I feel like since all this happened, people are kind of in 2 camps. They do nothing but watch the news incessantly, day in, day out, could tell you every detail. And then you have people, which I'm in this camp, have just turned the news off, since all of I can't take anymore. So literally not watching anything. How is that affecting how candidates campaign?
I think the really interesting part of that would be, Jennifer, candidates aren't doing a whole lot of in-person stuff, particularly on the Democratic side.
Oh, yeah, that too.
So, the best way to campaign has always been ground game, right? You get out, you knock the doors, you meet people, you go to events, you go at the baseball games and all that, and the county fairs and the business community meetings. That's a really effective and time-tested.
Yeah, right. I didn't even think about that. That's all been taken away.
Mm-hmm. If people aren't consuming media, that does affect it. Maybe it increases the effect of direct mail, or things that can reach people, that can penetrate through.
A lot of social. I'm saying
a lot of social. That's everyone's on social media now. I'm waiting for Zoom to start selling political advertising so I can corner that market. I think people are predisposed to vote with who they live with in many cases. So we just did some pretty intense analysis of the Texas electorate. And one of the most significant factors in predicting how someone will vote is the number of Republicans in a household or the number of Democrats in a household. The more you get, the more likely everybody in that household is going to be. You multi-generational households, you have a lot of them now. Maybe you get one person in the house who is very well informed, and that colors 4 or 5 votes. It colors some neighbors. So people tend to be predisposed to a party, but I don't know if that holds anymore. And if people aren't watching the news, I mean, look, I try and have a pretty robust media diet because I'm in this industry, and it's important.
Your job,
yeah, and it's important to hear what both sides are saying. But I would caution everyone here: for every minute you watch MSNBC or Fox, watch the other one and CNN, because the truth is somewhere in the middle. Certainly be very cautious of acquiring news or political advocacy via social media. It's really easy for very easily debunked rumors to spread like wildfire. And there's an old saying about rumor, I can't even remember it. Something like the rumor makes its way around the world before the truth gets its shoes on, or something like that. Someone could put in the Q&A what the actual quote is. But once the toothpaste is out of the tube on stuff like that, it's hard. So please be a selective and critical consumer of what you see. If something sounds really inflammatory and BS, it probably is. And there's good sites out there that can help you debunk that. You can also, I would be remiss if I didn't say, trust your slate card that you're going to get from Texas Realtors, because all those candidates have been vetted by groups of realtors just like you. So we put a lot of time into finding the better candidate and finding the right person to make the right decisions for the most representative of a district. We couldn't do it without our local partners, and so we appreciate y'all for that.
Yeah, I think just overall, there's such a high level of mistrust. And so, when you are looking for sources, your associations really these are members like you, very bipartisan, when you look at candidates that we support who are truly just looking at issues. So it's a great resource to look at those. So I want to talk a little bit about real estate here in Texas. When all of this started, we were very fortunate here in Texas to have real estate deemed essential. There were some states where people had to go 6, 8, 9 weeks before they could do anything, any type of work. So kind of tell people what went on behind the scenes in order to make that happen here in Texas.
Ooh, yeah. I mean, to be fair, I would say most real estate associations, state real estate associations, were successful in lobbying their state executive officers to adopt the CISA guidelines. We'll talk about that in a second. But in fact, Jennifer, you and I sit on the national committee where we did that.
So we hear about these other states that are struggling.
Yeah, we did that deal in Pennsylvania, which was the last state to become essential, which I think was in early June.
Yeah.
After the CISA, which is it's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. It's a division of Homeland Security. They came out with some guidelines that had real estate deemed as essential. I may not be saying that right, but I really have to take my hat off to NAR on that one. They worked their tails off to get that done, which gave states, sort of loaded the gun for states to go to their executive officers and say, see, we're essential. Housing is essential. People are in really bad positions here. And it's not about hosting open houses and making a commission. It's about people who are between houses, people who are actively moving, have transactions. Where are they supposed to go?
Right.
If we're not allowed to continue closing these transactions and find a safe way to do it, those people are going to be homeless in a really bad time, or they could be paying 2 mortgages, wiping out all their save, right? So they find themselves just kind of caught in this flux between transactions. So, I would credit certainly credit the relationships and the coalitions that the relationships we have and the coalitions that we belong to, as well as our relationships with the governor and the executive officers in the state legislature. you know, all that through all of our efforts in government affairs, it really made a difference. You know, it took some lobbying between, I think we were in like a 2-week period from the middle of March to the end of March where our staff was blowing up his office with, you know, suggestions and please help and things like that. And, you know, all the while trying to, you know, understand what was happening on the national scale and at the local scale with the court jurisdictions over evictions and closures, and ensure local orders were workable, which they all weren't. It was a mess. It was a total mess. Yeah. And I really have to credit our lobby side and our legal team for really stepping up. I mean, they did fantastic work. It was mind-boggling. For me, I'm a campaign guy, right? So campaigns were just over. We had just had the primaries. I was kind of doing my victory laps and, you know, writing up analyses and looking at, you know, precinct by precinct analysis of what happened in this primary. And meanwhile, they were unavailable. They were so busy working 18 hours a day. And it's hard work. It's a testament to the relationships that we have and that you guys help develop at the local level. And, you know, the fact that we've been so supportive of our elected officials.
Yeah, and I think a lot of members don't really truly recognize how trusted, you know, you guys have really built a reputation there in Austin, you know, with those elected officials, and same thing, you know, here locally. And those relationships are huge when something like this comes up. You know, the fact that we've built that level of trust. So, I mean, I don't think people appreciate it like they should, you know, and unless it was gone, then all of a sudden they would realize how important it is. So we appreciate you guys for that.
Yeah, it always blows my mind when I hear members say that we shouldn't be involved in politics.
Yes.
But that's exactly what associations do. And you saw it, I mean, case in point, look at March. I mean, there is nothing else. Now I will tell you this. I got an angry member that emailed me and said, "Thanks for making us essential. Now I can't get unemployment."
Oh yeah. But you can't, no matter what, you can't win.
Okay.
No matter what you do. Well, so what races are you really watching here in Texas? What are some of the key ones?
Well, I mean, keeping it around your area. Let me pull my little sheet so I don't want to miss any. There, you know, I showed those 19 those seats earlier. Dr. Stein had 27. I've got 30 House seats that are, you know, that I consider to be in play. So in your area, of course, House District 26, which is the Rick Miller seat, you've got J.C. Jetton and Sarah DeMarchant running for that seat. That one leans Republican. Here, I'll just put this up again because I'm just reading it to you.
Visual is good.
You guys seeing it?
Yes.
Cool. So up here you've got HDC. This is the open Rick Miller seat. Gary Gates, who just won a special election back in the TREPAC supported Gary Gates, who just won back in I think it was January in a special runoff. Ed Thompson, that one kind of I think that one's probably going to be okay, but it does fall within that mathematical model that shows it as a lead seat. Let's see where else in Houston. You've got a lot of these are in Dallas and Houston, no surprise. Here we go, get down to here. Sam Harless, he's running against Natalie Hurtado, who is the woman he ran against last time. I think that one could be pretty close. TREPAC supported Gina Kalani is running out in 132 against former Representative Mike Schofield.
She defeated last time, right?
He defeated him last time, and he never actually changed his Twitter bio from state rep.
Really?
He's always coming back. Yeah.
Okay.
So we had a wonderful session with Representative Kalani. In fact, she made our post session. I don't want to give her the wrong classification, but she made our post session list of good list. Right. I guess I would call it. Our dear friend Sarah Davis, who is in a real dogfight. She is probably the only Republican that could ever represent that district. And y'all, I got to tell you, we got to do whatever we can for Sarah Davis because she is in a district that is like a 20-point Democratic district.
Mm-hmm.
And she knows that district so well and has represented them so well. I just hope it's enough this year, and I don't hope isn't enough. We got to get out and work, and we certainly hope that Houston Realtors will help with Sarah Davis. She's been fantastic for us. In fact, she's going to be a panelist at our Government Affairs Forum here in virtual conference.
Yeah, she's a rock star.
He's a rock star and fantastic for us. John Rosenthal, there in 135. He won last time against Gary Elkins. So he's got, he's in a lean D seat, but then you got the Bohack seat there that's open. Who knows what's going to happen out there? I think that one does lean Democratic. So those are the seats in your area that I'm watching. But I would love to hear if anybody has something that did I miss, or y'all watching a seat or see a seat that I don't have up here, or that I have that y'all think is wrong.
Well, yeah, and if anybody has one, you can pop it up here. You touched on a good point, though, saying that we need to get behind these candidates, kind of talk about what realtors, because I think they just think, oh, well, my association endorsed this person, so there, like, job done. What can we really do, boots on the ground, to help get these people elected or reelected, so we still have those allies?
Well, I'm super glad you asked, because one of my jobs as your political director is to engage realtors in the election process. So we can always do realtor facing stuff. We will always do that. We have a lot of realtors, as you know, there in Houston. In fact, I'm pretty sure Sarah Davis has the second most realtors in her district than any other.
I think that's right. I've heard that before. Yeah.
And so if we do a realtor facing campaign where I'm happy to send your staff data on, what realtors live in what district, and y'all can phone bank. And this is a great way to get your political affairs committee involved. Sit there and we rank them by likelihood of voting and partisan score, and we send all kinds of information over to you. Who's likely to crisscross the ballot, and who's going to just, no, thank you. I'm a Democrat, or I'm a Republican.
Right.
We prioritize the call list for you. So y'all can run a local phone bank. We do realtor facing campaigns all the time. In some districts, we might even do mail. I think we did some mail for Sarah Davis last time, because there's enough realtors to make a mail program worth it. The more, obviously you guys know this, you print cards. The more you do, the cheaper it gets. Printing 500 cards isn't probably worth it, but I think Sarah's got close to 2,000 realtors in her district. So
yes, she does.
That you can always volunteer with the campaigns. There is nothing, we talked about building relationships, Jennifer, earlier. There is nothing that elected officials remember more than, 5 or 6 realtors coming to their campaign headquarters and saying, can I stand at the polls for you? Do you need help with the phones? Can I share your social posts? Can I, how do I help? Go ask these campaigns how to help. And if you don't know how to get in touch with them, I assure you, Karen Driscoll does.
Of course. Yeah. And Karen's just pointing out, we had Sarah Davis on our last episode of The Blend. So if you did that, you can head over to YouTube and catch that. But I do think
what I'm hearing is that I'm famous.
Yeah. There you go. She's no Brandon Alderete, but we'll give her a shout out too. So there's one thing, and I would just love for you to address this, because as somebody who has been involved, served on the committee, sees how it works, sees, does the candidate interviews, understands why we endorse who we do. But then, just the climate that we live in, you get on Facebook, and no matter what, half of our candidates are usually from one party, half are from the other. And members, just because we endorse people from other, I'm not voting for them, I'm not giving money to TREPAC, I'm not. So I wish we could do a better job of educating them on how important it is and why we endorse who we do. So, could you just touch on that for a minute, on how, not to focus so much on the R and the D?
Well, I don't think you can take that out of it, Jennifer, and here's why. It exists. It's very real. And when you get into the legislature, here's a good one. Y'all remember, I'm sure 2015, most of the folks on this call, I'm sure, have been around since 2015. We had our Prop 1, which was the constitutional ban on real estate transfer taxes. So to get something on the ballot in Texas to make a constitutional ban, it takes 2/3 of each chamber to get something on the ballot. We didn't have 2/3 majority in the Texas House in that session. You have to get Democrats on board if you want to make a constitutional change. And if you just show up when you need something, they'd be inclined to tell you to go jump in a lake.
Mhm.
Also, you know, we have members of all political persuasions. And we're looking for, I mentioned this earlier, we're looking for representatives who understand and appreciate the importance of real estate, the complexities of the real estate transaction and the real estate industry. And, you know, those can come in all shapes and sizes and colors and parties. So, you know, what most of our issues, quite frankly, are nonpartisan. But, you know, we're looking for people who represent their districts, because our realtors live in those districts and are parts of those districts and are fabrics of the community in those districts. So, you know, the other side, I said you can't take party out of it.
Mhm.
Let me tell you something. You heard Dr. Stein say it. I showed you some districts here. The Democrats are coming. And some people, you know, I've heard people say the demographic shift in Texas is happening. No, it's happened.
Yeah.
It may not play out for a few years. It has happened. And I would say, I think I tend to agree with Dr. Stein that at some point, Texas will turn blue. It has happened. And wouldn't you be upset if we lost all political power at that point because we never had ever talked to or supported a Democrat ever?
Mhm.
And I'll tell you another thing. For our Democratic friends who get upset with us for supporting Republican officials, wouldn't they be upset if real estate weren't so respected at the Texas Capitol and in the governor's mansion at this point?
Yeah.
You have to have friends everywhere. And that's what we do. We're in the business of making friends.
Mhm. I've never heard you say it that way before, but I like it. But it is true. I mean, like you said, that's how you build that trust. It's how you build those relationships, is by reaching across the aisle, working with everybody, being a trusted, nonpartisan source. And we are seeing the benefit of it. I mean, this year more than ever.
You know, I think one thing that I always say too, and this just occurred to me, it's really easy to look at the Texas House or the Texas Senate or politics in general and see Democrat and Republican.
Mhm.
But one thing that I've learned since I've been at Texas Realtors, in the government affairs department in particular, there's a lot of ways to slice and dice that Texas House, that Texas Senate. First of all, Democrats are not monolithic.
Mhm.
Republicans are not monolithic. We've seen divisions in both parties. South Texas Democrats are way different than, you know, social justice warrior in the suburbs. That's a different conversation. You talk to them in different ways.
Mhm.
The other thing is, you know, you've got urban versus rural lawmakers. A lot of times the most liberal urban lawmakers will have to team up with the most conservative rural lawmakers to get something done, albeit for different reasons. They're opposed to the same thing, but for different reasons.
Yeah.
You've also got, you know, areas that are subject to drought versus areas that are water rich.
Mhm.
You think Dem and Republican stuff is contentious?
Mhm.
Talk about water. It's crazy. You got coastal versus inland.
Yeah.
You got suburban. You got Chapter 41 versus Chapter 42, the school districts, the Robin Hood, the donor schools versus the recipient schools. That's a deal. There's a lot. It's way bigger than Dem and Republican. Dem and Republican is the easy one to focus in on, but I assure you it's way more complicated than that. And one of the most interesting things you'll see, and I see it from a distance because I'm not on the lobby team, I'm not in the Capitol, is the horse trading that you hear about going on when they're trying to pass legislation. It's really interesting. It's fascinating. It's a wonderful process.
Mhm. Interesting. Well, I mean, this has been really enlightening. I hope for members who maybe don't realize exactly what goes on up there in Austin, you know, at the state level, I hope it's been enlightening for them. And again, it is so important for our members that we are involved. We are involved in politics. We have a seat at the table. We can get things done. And so you and Dr. Stein, having you both on today has been great. So we appreciate it. And for anybody who wants to watch this again, I know we're gonna pop it over on YouTube so you can get to catch it all. We'll share those slides that Dr. Stein brought, and we appreciate you guys all being here today. So thank you so much, Brandon.
That was my pleasure, Jennifer. Take care, y'all. Kylie, Karen, we'll see you later. Grant.